Continue on with Moses in the last book that he wrote for the Pentateuch. I want you to wait for put your classes out. We went to one of the confessions this morning. We went to catechism this morning. If you would bring up Lois Day and Heidelberg Catechism. Bring up Lois Day. 634. Yeah. Yes, Lois Day 34. Number. Catechesis number 92.
So, Lord's Day Catechism.
Oh, I'm sorry. Heidelberg Catechism.
Oh.
But it's called. They broke them down about each Sunday.
Lord's Day 1.
Lord's Day 34. Okay. Lord's Day 34, question 92. It says, what is the law of God? And we can go to paragraph 1 and 2. We're not going to read 3 and 4 and 7. Before we want to cue today's lesson is number 1 says, thou shalt have no other God before me. Number 2 says, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness, or anything that is in heaven above, or is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me, but showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Number 3 says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord would not hold him guiltless who take his name in vain. As we know, that comes from the Decalogue, and it comes again in today's lesson, the prelude to today's lesson in Deuteronomy 5, because when you see in Deuteronomy 5, Moses gives the law the final time before they cross over cross the Jordan over into the land of Canaan. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on more, though. Let's now go to the Lord's Day number 2, which reads, and then if you will, I just read it to you. Lord's Day number 2. How many things are necessary? How many things are necessary for thee to know that thou enjoy the comfort and may live and die happily? The 3. The first, how great my sins and miseries are. And the second, how I may be delivered from all my sins and miseries. And the third, how I shall express my gratitude to God for such deliverance. And this is what I want to key on today. The last part it says here, the third one it says, that I shall express my gratitude to God for such deliverance. Because as we stand here, today's lesson as standing at the Jordan River, and Moses gives his final sermon, which is really the whole book of Deuteronomy. The whole book of Deuteronomy is the last sermon Moses gives to Israel before they cross over Jordan to take the land. And Moses is basically saying to these people, your response to God is obedience. Your response to God is gratitude. Because God has loved you. God has made a covenant with you before you got to this point. God has fulfilled his covenant with you. He has fulfilled his covenant as we have seen throughout the past lessons that he promised with the seed, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, down to this present time where they're not at the river Jordan to cross over. And so Moses is saying that God has already loved you, and so now God has a response from you. The response of them, their response, and our response, likewise, is that we have to show gratitude because we cannot love God unless he first loved us. God has already loved them. She's already expressed his covenant love. He's fulfilled every promise to them that he told them he would do. And now he's brought them to the place, in spite of, let's go back for a minute. In spite of all the things that they've done between our last meeting with Jacob till this point, they've gone through a whole lot of stuff. Even with Moses alone, let alone the part with Joseph and the rest of the boys and the other stories. But starting with Moses and Moses' deliverance out of Egypt. And when they crossed into the desert, all those 40 years. And basically what you have here is that, remember God told them that they would not cross, that generation would die, that generation would die out in the wilderness or in the desert. And they had died out. This is the young generation getting ready to cross over, except for two people, Caleb and Joshua. Even Moses doesn't make it over the Jordan. And so before they cross over, Moses needs to remind them. God has commanded Moses to remind them again how I love you, how I fulfill all my commandments to you that I promised you, and that how I have delivered you out of the enemy's hands, how I have brought you through your grumblings, I have given you bread in the desert to eat, I have given you shoes to wear on your feet, I have given you clothes to wear on your back, I have given you water to drink when you complain, and I have given you a serpent to look to be delivered, and all the other things he said. Now it's time that you remember that you owe me. Because remember in the Decalogue, even in Exodus, there's always, when the covenants are made, there's always the preamble and the prologue. He declares who he is, why he deserves obedience. Because I am God and I know A, B, C, and D. The prologue. Then it goes through all the tenets of the commandments. And so what Moses is doing again here at Jordan River, he's beginning to get him in the final sermon. He opens it again with the second iteration of the Decalogue. And that's where it brings us to today's lesson, because what he's saying to them, you have seen how I delivered you out of all those so-called, I'm going to give you, we talked about it last week one time, a little bit. 3 words that we're going to talk about this morning, today's lesson. Word polytheism, henotheism, and monotheism. Now we know that God has proven himself to the people of Israel these 40 years in the desert, delivered them out of Egypt, and all those gods they quote-unquote feared in Egypt, how he delivered them. And in this process, what God is doing, God is winning them and showing them that you have assigned, and so did Pharaoh, and all those people had their so-called many gods. A god for the sun, a god for the moon, a god for the land, a god for the whatever, you name it, they got a god for. It's polytheism. Anyway, you can worship all you want to. But and remember last week, in the last lesson, I think I discussed it with you, when Jacob got to Bethel, and we had that question about, he said, now I know God is in this place, Jacob said. We talk about henotheism, and I mentioned to you henotheism, H-E-N-O, not chicken, H-E-N, henotheism. He says that every country, every land has its own God. And what Jacob was saying, I know now I'm learning that God's not just the God of Jordan, Syria, Israel, blah, 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 blah. I know that God's the God of all things. So now I know that the God of Elohim, he is the God of all. So therefore, it's not just every nation has its own God, but God that he's referring to, which is the one God, which brings us to today's lesson, is the only God. Even though people ascribe in their mind to polytheism, henotheism, Jacob, and what the law and Moses does very clearly in this second iteration of law, he reiterates again, that there is only one God. There are no many gods. Oh, there are many gods, but they're false gods. They're not God in the sense of a true God. They're not the capital G-O-D. They're not Yahweh. They don't have the wherewithal, the power. They don't have the being, the essence of this real God. And so what Moses is telling Israel at this point is that God has delivered you. The true God has delivered you. He's brought you to this point. Now it's time to cross over. But before you cross over, remember what your obligation is. Your obligation and your response to love is to be obedient. And he started out with bringing them back to the issue. First of all, God is one. And this one God has commanded that you to teach these things to your children. Because remember now, the others had died out. The old generation had died out. And he had promised to bring the new generation in. And now he's saying, now you teach them, and teach them how? Diligently. Day in and day out. Line by line, precept by precept. The things of who God is and what God requires of us. So this is where we come today in today's lesson with this 6th chapter we call the Shema. But it's important to understand that we understand that Shema has no meaning unless you tie it back to the commands. Because it's the commands that the Shema is referencing when it says by being obedient and teach him. Teach him what? God's law. Remind him what God has done. Remind him how God has loved him. Remember how God has fulfilled his covenant. And how God requires you to be obedient and to give him gratitude. So, let's go to our first reading this morning. Our first reading would be, let's just read what is the Shema. First of all, let me go back for let me explain what the Shema is. To an Orthodox, well, even Reform, but especially an Orthodox Jew, an Orthodox Jew remembered that God had told Moses to tell people before the crossover that they were to teach their children and these things diligently, that they would learn to live a long life in the land in which he was going to give them, and to be obedient. So the Shema is really 3 passages of scripture which we're going to read, which covers what God wanted. It's the essence, should I say, it's the essence of what is in the Shema. The word Shema really means hear, but let me clarify that too. It's not just the regular word hear. You remember in the old days when, well, I'm dating myself again. When I was a child, when the old folk would get real mad at you, and they wouldn't say hear to you, they would say hearken. There's a difference between hearing and hearkening. To hear is to hear with the oracle and this canal, and that physical transaction is inside your brain. You hear. But to hearken is to take to heed, to put it in your heart, to put it in your mind, and to abide. It means we call it active listening to the deepest sense, to hearken. So this word Shema, hear, which is the first word, is really to hearken. Not just hear it, but you better obey it. It's a hearing with a warning. It's a hearing with an admonishment. It says, so we're gonna look at that passage. We're gonna read Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. And it reads, Shema Yisrael Adonai Echad, which in Hebrew means, hear ye, O Israel, the Lord your God. Elohim, the plurality of God, of majesty, is one God in essence. It says, you shall love, and see, God tells them to love him, but it would make no sense for God to tell them to love him if he ain't shown them love already. He's already shown and demonstrated his love for them by delivering them to this very point out of slavery, out of the wilderness, out of the desert, and to the point where he is to deliver them into the land of milk and honey. So he says, you are to love, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you to, he says command you today, shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets before your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your houses, or your house, and on your gates. This is the first part of the Shema. The second part of the Shema is Deuteronomy 11. 13 to 21. And let's read. Everything says, and if you will indeed obey my commandments, and that I command you today to love the Lord your God with your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give you the rain for the land, for your land in its season, the early rains, the latter rains, and you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your field for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets before your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you are sitting in your house, and when you are walking by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall write them on the doorpost of the house and your gates, and that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore by your fathers to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. That's the second part of Shabbat, which is an iteration and embellishment of the first part. Now the last part of it, with the Numbers 15. Numbers 15, 37 to 41. Numbers 37 through 41. And it reads, and the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and to do them, not to follow after your own heart or your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. And you see how he opened it up with that? I am the Lord your God, begins again, and he closes it out with that. How he bookends it. He's saying, you owe me allegiance. I delivered you. I've loved you. I've kept my covenant to you. Not that you deserved it, not that you were better than anyone else, but because I have placed my love upon you, you have an obligation, a responsibility to show gratitude for what I've done. And so he's telling them what to do, because he says, you're going to cross over to the land, and you're going to possess the land. And you're going to possess the land of milk and honey, a land that's overflowing with plenty, more than you've ever seen. He says, but if you want to have it good in the land that you're going to possess, remember, I am the Lord your God. And remember, there is no other gods before me. And he says, and do not serve other gods. And we know that when we refer to that, he's saying those don't have a god of the moon, a god for the harvest, a god for the sowing, a god for the reaping, a god for the whatever. I am the Lord, dear God. I'm one. And he says, remember that I've delivered you, and if you want it to be well with you and your family, and if you remember we read it earlier, he says about you and your children, if you want it to be well with you in the land that I promised you, you need to keep these commands. And we know that none of us, nor Israel, has ever loved God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength at how many times? Huh? Huh? Talk to me now. Man, let me change that question then. When was the last time you loved God with all your heart, your soul, your mind? We don't do it. Or why would he tell us that's foolishness then?
That's what required of us. We don't.
God is holy, and God requires perfection. And he requires us to, he said, I'm holy. And he requires holiness from us. So why would God tell us such foolishness as to love him with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind? And we translate it in the New Testament with our strength. Because in Hebrew, it doesn't work for strength in Hebrew. So, but in Greek, it doesn't work for strength. It means your totality, your total being, the core, the essence of who you is. All of you, not just part of you. So how many times, when was the last time, or the first time, that either of us, me and you and you and you and me, has ever loved God with all of my being, with the totality of who I is? Never, because of my fallenness. But what? Remember that conjunction that he preaches about all the time?
But God.
But God. Through whom?
Jesus
Christ.
Amen.
Still loves us.
He did it in my stead. He did it in my place. And therefore, I must be covered by his blood.
Amen.
And in Christ, I can do all things,
All things.
who strengthens me. And in Christ, in union with Christ, I am considered by God to be holy, to be perfect. But in reality, I was not. But in the main, in the end, God sees me as being covered in the righteous robe of his son, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what's so important.
Yeah.
So there ain't never been a time when either one of us has ever, even when we tried, even when we first converted, 5 minutes after I was converted, I'm sure my mind was somewhere else, on something else. Not my total essence of who I am was ever on God more than a half second, maybe a millisecond. But that's okay, because God sent the substitute. And that was what he was telling Israel. God has always promised a substitute from the very beginning. Genesis 3:15. Always promised a substitute. But God deals with us incrementally to grow us and to show us our need for him. Okay?
Amen.
Now, having covered the Shema, let's go back to the thing I want to talk about. It's so important that we understand. It is so important that Moses is telling Israel that God is one. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because in theology, there's a thing called the simplicity of God. And the simplicity of God is a very complex theological concept. We also talk about God's attributes. All those things are one in God. God's holy, God's loving, God's all-knowing. Well, all the things we talk about who God is. That's all one. They're not inseparable. They're not compartmentalized. God's one. But what Moses is telling Israel is that even here, when he said by Elohu, it's a form of the word Elohim, which is the plurality of majesty. It implies more than just God, a father. It implies God something else. God the Father, and God something else. He doesn't clarify in the Old Testament. It doesn't break down as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as we do in the New Testament. Jesus Christ clearly defined that. But it implies that God, in his unity, is one. God in his totality is one. He's not many gods. So therefore, don't worry about this thing we call a God for Israel, a God for Jordan, a God for any other nation. Because God is God over all of the creation. The whole creation is God. And there ain't no many gods that you acclaim, that you ascribe glory to. They can't save you. They're wooden stones or wooden or stone images. And all I can do is look at you with a blank stare. They can't respond back to you. But he's saying, I am God. And he responds to us with love. He's saying that, not love, but I have already loved you. I've delivered you. I've been your God. I have brought you to this point. I want you to be having good where I'm sending you to. But you got to do what I ask you to do. No, I take it back. God has never asked us to do anything. God doesn't give it. God always commands. This is the imperative. He commands us. And Moses said, well, God commanded the people to do. To love him. We can love him because he has first loved us. That is our response. That's our responsibility. To show gratitude for who he is. Okay? So this is what's important that he's taking you. Don't you got out of this whole lesson about the Shema. And then the reason, but also there's another angle too. The Shema was so important and still is. In an Orthodox Jewish family, the Shema is so important because it forms the core of the nucleus of the family. Because this is how blessings is passed along from one generation to the next. You have an obligation not to let the state train your children, which we do, for whatever reason. That's another story. Your obligation to train children is not Sunday school, which we try to do sometimes. But your obligation is to train children around your table, at your house, in your household, in the morning and at night. To recite these stories, to recite the goodness of the Lord and what God requires of you in the morning when you get up and in the evening when you go to bed, at least twice a day. You can do more than what they want to, but at least twice a day. That's what's required of you to teach your children. This is what we call catechesis. And a lot of us don't do catechesis in church. No. That's unfortunate. Because if we don't catechize our children to know God, they're more than likely not going to know him later on. That's just my guess. And then again, a lot of times, and I'm going to get my soapbox a little bit. Do you know when you do studies of the church today, that 80% or more of the people that are raised in the church today, when they get 18 or before, they leave the church and they stay away from the church? And you know how come? You know the reason why they stay away from the church? Most of them do.
No foundation.
What about the foundation? What about it?
It's no foundation.
What explain to me?
Meaning that, sometimes parents, or we as parents, didn't do what we're supposed to do. We didn't train them up. We didn't teach them how to love God. We didn't teach them about the Word of God. And nowadays, that doesn't seem to happen. That's why people just leave.
There was no diligence in teaching, and there was no care in taking time to understand who God is, so you can tell who God is. See, a lot of times we have, and I know in a lot of black families, we have a very faulty notion of who God is. I've heard so many stories from my peers over the years that I've been living, even today, of what they're talking at home, and something they're talking at home about who God is. It scares me, because they ain't the God of the Scripture at all. And what's so important is that if you fail to teach God diligently in the home, what do you expect your children to do when they get exposed to atheism, agnosticism, and all kind of isms and schisms out there? They fall away. They haven't told. You said they have no foundation because we haven't taught them to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, and strength, and everything. We haven't demonstrated. Not that we are perfect. We haven't demonstrated love. We haven't demonstrated Christ. We haven't walked in the holiness of life to demonstrate to them, so they don't say, oh, what's there? Going through the motions. I don't go through the motions like that day to do. But hear me out now, because I want you to think that this is hardcore, because there's always deviations to everything I'm telling you right about, not everything, but about this here. You can teach people the truth, and still they not be drawn to the truth. But what I'm saying to you is that what we fail at is that many times we have failed to teach the truth. We have failed to teach him who God is. So therefore, they have nothing to hold on to about who God is. So it's important that we do our part even when they have fallen away, because I'm a firm believer when they've been taught diligently that there is a kernel somewhere in that soil that's going to pop up one day and blossom. I'm a firm believer in that. Maybe my church can do that one day. Because I try hard. I can tell you, I tried hard for many years to teach my catechesis. But sometimes I knew I failed. But I tried hard because I was always burdened by that. I wasn't taught that as a child, catechesis. I went to Sunday school, and I had a father and mother that taught me things, but I wasn't taught diligently about how important God was when I rose up in the morning and when I went to bed at night. I mean, I was taught that, but it wasn't to the point of what Moses talking about here, where it's a constant thing. And because he said, if you remember, he said, when you teach him, he says, and the Jews took this literally. He says, wear these binds on your arm, and these frontlets on your eyes, the mezuzah, and also on your doorpost. They used to have these little what's called phylacteries or frontlets. You know how when you want to train a horse or a dog to run a race, you put blinders you put what do you call it, frontlets on their side, or phylacteries on the side of the eyes to keep them on the prize. Because see, when a horse is walking around the street and he sees a piece of grass that he's going to eat, if you get that peripheral vision, he's going to go get that piece of grass and bite it. But if you keep him on that sight, he can't see that. Keep him on the straight and narrow. He says, put those phylacteries, those frontlets on the eye to keep you, to remind you. And what they had in those frontlets were these verses we read earlier. The Shema. They had Deuteronomy 11, Deuteronomy 6, and Deuteronomy 15 to remind them how good God has been and who God is and what God requires. He says that when you go in, and they have on the doorpost to remind them when they come in the house to thank the Lord for another day and to bless His house and all those things. It's that so that it became a very stern way of legalism that lost the spirit. So it's one thing to be able to do those things, but this law without the spirit is worthless. The law is by itself is worthless because it has the intent and the spirit behind the law, and it drives you to something else. And this is what they failed to see, the Jews did. But at any rate, it's important that he's saying you have to teach these things diligently. The word teach in Hebrew means to sharpen. It's like you start picking you know, we put those knife in that thing and that thing is sharpen that blade. It says sharpen your children. Teach them. Sharpen them. Sharpen them. Over and over again. Sharpen them. Let's go to the lesson. So here we stand at the crossover at the mountain. Not the mountain. At the river. Well, I don't know what they were. River or mountain, wherever. I know this much. Moses is going to give his last sermon because he's not going to cross over with him. Remember, all the old heads died out. The new ones are going across, and he says, "Remember what God has done. Look back how He's brought you from, and look what He's going to send you to. But there are stipulations, there are requirements, there are obligations, there are responsibilities that God requires of you because He has loved you with an everlasting love." Okay, let's go to the lesson. We'll start reading at the top of the lesson, top of the chapter, and going down. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God, that is Yahweh Adonai, your God, has commanded you to teach. The Lord has commanded me to teach you, that you may do them. And he was saying, I'm not just teaching you these laws, but I'm teaching these laws that you may apply them to your life when you cross over. These will preserve you. These will keep you. He says that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it. And you may fear the Lord your God with your God, you, your sons, and your sons' sons, by keeping all His statutes and His commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may belong. That should be, as you read from the may belong in the land that I was giving you. Because that's what he's referring to. He said, I'm going to bless you in the land that I'm giving you. And it says, hear therefore, this is the Shema. Hearken therefore. Now he said, I've done. God has declared who he is and what's word. That now for your obligation is this. Hearken therefore, O Israel, and be careful. He even says, be careful. To do all them, that it may go well with you, that you may multiply greatly as the Lord your God of your fathers has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. He's saying, you want to a land that has plenty. Remember that they had been traveling the desert for 40 years. And there was very little to eat other than what God provided. The manna and the quail at this time. But they didn't have a land that had big pomegranates, as you saw it with big pomegranates, with big grapes, big whatever, massive grapes, massive fruits, massive production land. He said, but you go into a land that's going to flourish with productivity, a land that's going to give you plenty, all you need. But if you want to have it, you got to be holy. You got to keep my commands. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, this blessing will become a what? A curse. And this is the condition that he places on him. And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. So let me ask you a question. What is the obstacle to us doing God's commands? What is the obstacle to us doing God's commands?
Sin.
Okay, sin. Break it down further for me.
Like our flesh is in enmity with God, so we never want to follow what He's telling us to do.
We are in constant enmity with God, which we call it the what? Our what? Our heart.
Oh. Our
heart. The core of our being, and which is what He commanded us to do. And see, that's what we said. He says, that's where we agree. Verse 6. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. In other words, he said, that's your obstacle right there. If you tend to the heart, get the heart right, your mind, your body, you will be okay. You will do what I ask you to do. Get your heart right. It's our heart that's always at enmity, at war with each other. It's we're at enmity and war with God. We don't want God. We run from God. Remember the garden demonstrated that for us. So God constantly pursues us. But even when we have been sought and bought, we still have a hard time letting the obstacles of our heart get in the way of our blessings. And it says, you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. See, and that's why if you know how Jewish children are taught in schools, they are taught almost from sunrise to sunset. And you ever seen those? I think they're probably Hasidic Jews. The ones where the yarmulkes and the cat and the hats and beards and everything else. Those people are so smart. They've been taught from youngsters and in school, in their schools, about God's requirement and the requirements of whatever it is that they're diligently taught. That's the carryover. Even the non-religious Jews, is that tradition of teaching and learning has been so instilled into their culture that it just proliferates and it just perpetuates and it goes on and on. And that's why they're so successful. One reason why. And we need to, as a people, all of us, but especially us black folk, we learn to get that in our family. Well, we really, I don't mean this to knock you to Harvards and to Yales, because that's mess them up, just be told. We need to start teaching our kids in our communities, in our homes, diligently, putting the foundation so firmly fixed in the home. and stop letting the world tell us what's important and what's not important, and who God ain't and who God is. Enough said about that. Let me move on. And it says, and when you die, when you rise. So he said, in a way, he said, when you, this is a thing you do every day, in the morning and at night. You shall bind them as signs on your hands. That's reminders. That Shema, those verses we read earlier, was in those things. And they put them out, and they would read the strips of paper when they pull them out, and then they'll go back in, the other strips of paper, whatever. And it said, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. So when you come and when you leave, you'll see the commands of God to remind you of your obligation to God. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land they swore to bring to you, they swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you with great and good cities. See what he's saying? They haven't even taken the cities yet. He says, but God has promised that he's going to bring you, when you cross Transjordanian, when you cross over, you're going to see that you come to cities already built, houses already built, that you didn't build, that you didn't labor for. So it says that when your fathers, to give you with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of good things that you did not fill, and cisterns, water wells, that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then, he says, then take care lest you forget the Lord. See, we have to take care lest we forget. We need to remember. We need to take care lest we forget. It's so easy for us to forget what God has done for us. It's so easy to belittle what God does for us. To take care to remember what God has done for you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. He says you should take oath by his name, because he's the one that can fulfill it. Remember to serve your Lord, not the Lord of the henotheistic person or the polytheistic person, but there is only one God that owns it all. Remember to serve him, because he has demonstrated his love to you, so you owe allegiance to him. And it says, and fear him. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name shall you make your oaths. You shall not go after other gods. See, he really embellishes this here. He's stressing the idea of monotheism. There is but one true God. I am he. God is he. Yahweh is him. There is no other God. Even though you put that notion in your mind and you give obedience and homage to that, it's only a curse to you. There's only one true God. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. You know what it says? Let the Jebusites and all the other sites and types have their own gods. They're nothing. Don't mimic them. Don't model their behavior. I've given you the best players to have. It says, you shall not go after other gods. 15. For the Lord your God is in your midst. You ever said, the Lord your God is in your midst. God has always, this is how we tell you, God has always desired to dwell among his people. Always, always, always. Even when they're in the wilderness, remember the pillar of cloud by fire day and night. Fire, whatever. You know what I'm He always desires to dwell among his people. Even in the tabernacle, the tent, the building they made, was a symbol of his presence. Symbol of his presence. He says he wants to be in your midst because he is a jealous God. Why is he jealous? Why is he jealous?
Because he's the only true living God. So
and he's the only true living God, and
he's the only one in control.
He's the only one in control. And he's reminding them, everything you got came from me.
Oh yeah, he's a creator.
I brought you out of Egypt. I brought you through the desert. I'm giving you houses you ain't gonna build. I'm giving you fruit trees and pomegranates and olives and figs and whatever it is you ain't planted. Who else can do that to you? Who else can do that for you? Nobody. Nothing. So therefore, I'm jealous. I regard my name as holy, and I want you to remember and regard me as holy. Lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from off the face of the earth. And if you know from reading the rest of after the Canaan land was taken by conquest, you see how all the things that happened, the blessings and the cursings, when they failed to keep God's law. You remember the thing with Achan, especially when Joshua took over, the thing with Achan and some other things happened. When they failed to not put God first and to look at the other gods, if it's money or whatever, then they fell into punishment and the curse. And you shall, 16, and you should not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. Remember, in the wilderness, when they complained, and was that the one Massah? Is that the one with the water? Okay, and this is, remember now, this is the same thing that caused Moses to miss the promised land, because God told him to. What did God tell him to do to the rock?
Speak to the rock.
Speak to the rock. What did he do? He struck it in anger. That's why complaining and bickering and grumping and groaning is wrong. He said, "Speak to the rock, Moses. This is the rock of your salvation. Speak to it." Moses, bam! Probably cursed too, probably. Told. I would curse something like that. And this is what caused Moses to miss the promised land. He says, remember, he says, and you shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his statutes, which he has commanded you, and you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you, and that it may go into the land, the position of the land, the good land that he swore to give to your fathers, by thrusting out all of your enemies before you, as the Lord has promised. We're going to stop there because the time is up. But what he's saying, you go into the land, and you're going to take the land. But he says, do what is right in my sight. It may go well with you when you get to that land. And go and take possession of that land that I promised to give you. I promised to your fathers to give you. By thrusting out, he said, because I'm going to thrust out all your enemies before you. As he has promised. God is a covenant God. Yeah. He is a God of promise, and he never fails. And because he has not failed in his promises, you have an obligation to him to show gratitude and obedience. That is your responsibility, because God is faithful. Amen. Amen?